You think that shiny metal makes you untouchable? The cop sneered, yanking the old man's arm behind his back. Medal of Honor, my ass. You people lie for a living. The metal cuff snapped shut, loud enough to silence the park. Right in front of the Veterans Memorial, in full dress uniform, at a public ceremony honoring the nation's heroes. The man in cuffs, Jeremiah Brooks, Navy Master Chief, 33 years of service, and a Medal of Honor pinned to his chest. He didn't resist. He didn't shout. He just looked down and waited. 8 minutes later, a black SUV pulled up to the curb, and the governor stepped out. The sun had just risen over the rooftops of downtown Montgomery, Alabama, casting a golden hue across the Veterans Memorial Park. Flags hung at half-staff. A brass band was warming up near the main stage. Today was a day to honor the fallen, and Mr. Jeremiah Brooks had every reason to be there. 70 years old, a retired U.S. Navy Master Sergeant, the man who had pulled 5 wounded comrades from an ambushed convoy in Fallujah, even after taking shrapnel to the back, and still returned to the fight, holding the line until reinforcements arrived. He never bragged about it. In fact, if you didn't look closely, you'd never know, unless you spotted the Medal of Honor gleaming on the left side of his chest. Today, he wore his full dress uniform, deep navy, trimmed in silver, medals aligned with precision, white gloves, and a perfectly squared Marine cap. Jeremiah didn't move fast anymore. After 2 back surgeries and a left knee that clicked with every step, he walked slowly, but with unmistakable dignity, until he neared the park's south gate. "Hey, you there. Stop. Let me see some ID." The voice came from a nearby patrol car. Officer Wade Dursley stepped out, hand already resting near his belt. Early 30s, buzz cut, sunglasses masking any expression. A gleaming police badge sat on his chest, possibly shinier than his thoughts. Jeremiah turned slowly. "Good morning, officer. I'm here for the memorial. I have an invitation from the governor's office." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a letter, its red seal clearly visible. But Wade didn't even glance at it. His eyes had already made a judgment. Black man, in uniform, alone. "Where'd you get that uniform?" Wade snapped, circling him like a vulture. "You pretending to be a vet, trying to pull some stunt this morning?" Jeremiah wasn't surprised. He simply inhaled, quietly, just enough to stay calm. "I served 33 years. My paperwork's in order. There's no need to raise your voice. Watch your tone with me." Wade yanked the ID card from Jeremiah's hand. "I've seen plenty like you. Buy a cheap uniform, pin on a few fake medals, hope for free coffee and a front row seat." Jeremiah's fingers curled slightly, not out of fear, but restraint. He had stood in the middle of enemy fire. He had heard the final cries of dying men. But this, being treated like a criminal in the country he defended, cut deeper than any battlefield wound. Pedestrians had begun to stop and stare. A teenager pulled out his phone to record. A jogger slowed, frowning in confusion. Still calm, Jeremiah said, "If you call the governor's office, they'll confirm everything. I was formally invited." Wade snorted. "Yeah, I'll get right on that. In the meantime, turn around." "Excuse me?" "I said turn around. Hands behind your back. You're being detained for questioning." The sound of handcuffs snapped through the air, cold, harsh, disrespectful. The crowd began to murmur. Someone shouted, "He's a vet. Are you insane?" A woman stepped forward. "Look, that's the Medal of Honor." Wade didn't even turn. He pushed Jeremiah down onto a park bench, radioing dispatch. Jeremiah sat still, cuffed, head bowed, not in shame, but under the weight of humiliation. The red-sealed invitation peeked from his breast pocket, fluttering in the wind. A member of the brass band, dressed in an ROTC uniform, saw the scene, dropped his trumpet, and rushed over. "That's Master Sergeant Brooks. My dad served under him. He's a hero." Wade turned sharply. "Back off, I'm doing my job." But the atmosphere had shifted. People were watching, recording, asking questions. Jeremiah said nothing. He just stared at the cracked pavement below. And then, at the far end of the path, a black SUV with no official plates screeched into the park. Jeremiah didn't look up. Not yet. But he would. Because exactly 8 minutes later, the man who stepped out of that SUV would change everything. Officer Wade Dursley took a step back, exhaling like he'd just busted a career conman. He looked down at Jeremiah Brooks, not like a man upholding the law, but with the smug disdain of someone hiding prejudice behind procedure. "Now sit tight," Wade said loudly, as if performing for an audience. "Support units on the way to run a background check." I've seen a lot of these fake veteran cases. You think throwing on a dress uniform and a few medals from eBay fools anybody? Jeremiah looked up. There was no anger in his eyes, no fear, just a profound sadness, so deep it reflected something back into the soul of anyone who met his gaze. You know, he said slowly, when I was wounded in Fallujah, I wrapped my bleeding side with the shirt of a soldier who'd just died. I carried him across 10 meters of fire and gunfire, and he was whiter than you. Wade paused briefly, but instead of listening, he scoffed. Oh, touching story. Let me guess, you had dinner with the president too? Jeremiah didn't respond. A middle-aged woman stepped forward, hands trembling as she held up her phone. Officer, I just looked him up. This is Jeremiah Brooks. The Washington Post ran a story on him last year. He really did receive the Medal of Honor. Wade glanced at the screen, then waved it off. Photoshop's everywhere these days. Don't fall for it. The woman's face went pale. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder. A young man in an ROTC shirt stepped forward, eyes red. I know him. I met him at a military seminar last month. He's a living legend. You're cuffing a damn legend. Back up, Wade barked, or I'll arrest you for obstructing an officer. No one spoke again, but more phones went up, and the eyes, those silent judging eyes, were all on Wade now. Their weight was heavier than any pair of handcuffs. Jeremiah remained seated. Wind rustled the sea of flags behind him. The American flag atop the memorial fluttered gently, an impotent witness to what was happening beneath it. 7 minutes had passed. A low engine rumble rolled in. A black SUV, unmarked, braked sharply at the park's front gate, drawing gasps from the crowd. The door opened. A tall, lean man stepped out, dressed in a gray suit. His face was weathered by sun and service. No security, no entourage. A few people recognized him instantly. It was Daniel Forsyth, the governor of Alabama. Wade didn't have time to react. A petite aide rushed to his side, whispering urgently, "Take off the cuffs, now. That man is the governor's former commanding officer." "What?" Wade stammered. But it was too late. Daniel Forsyth was already walking straight toward them. No one dared stand in his way. Jeremiah. His voice was low and shaking, not from fear, but fury. "You okay?" Jeremiah looked up at him. For a moment his face softened. "I'm fine, but Alabama's not, if this is how they treat veterans." Forsyth clenched his jaw, then turned to Wade. His voice turned to ice. "Do you even realize what you've just done?" Wade stuttered. I was just following protocol." "What protocol allows you to handcuff a Medal of Honor recipient, personally invited by me, at a veterans memorial park? What did you see? A black man in uniform, and your brain immediately screamed fake?" I didn't know who he was." "That," Forsyth growled, "is exactly the problem. You didn't know, because you never cared to know." Wade froze. There was no defense left. Governor Forsyth knelt and personally unlocked the cuffs from Jeremiah's wrists. As the final medal clasp fell away, applause erupted from the crowd. Jeremiah remained seated, back straight, chin high. No shouting, no revenge, just silence and dignity. No one in the Veterans Memorial Park that day would ever forget what they witnessed. A man in a gray suit, the most powerful figure in the state of Alabama, kneeling on one knee to remove the handcuffs from an elderly veteran, while dozens of phones captured every second. There was no stage, no waving flag of honor, only concrete beneath them, and a medal quietly glowing in the sunlight. Daniel Forsyth, the governor of Alabama, rose to his feet, his hands still trembling with rage. He didn't need a microphone. His voice rang out clear and commanding in the dead silence. "To those recording, don't stop. Keep your cameras rolling. You all need to hear this." He turned to the officer. "Officer Dursley, as of this moment, you are suspended from duty pending an internal investigation. Your badge and firearm, hand them over." Wade stood frozen, his mouth open. I was just following protocol." "Then tell me," Forsyth said coldly, "what exactly is your protocol? To see a black man in uniform holding an official invitation from my office, wearing a real Medal of Honor, and still choose to twist his arms and cuff him in a public park?" "I didn't know who he was." "And that's precisely the problem," Forsyth said, voice rising. "You didn't know because you never cared to know." He turned to face the crowd. This entire state just witnessed a painful truth, that there are still officers who believe skin color is cause for suspicion, that honor can be dismissed by a pair of sunglasses and a fragile ego hiding behind a badge. No one moved. Jeremiah remained silent. He didn't have to speak, because his dignity had spoken for him. A local news reporter, newly arrived, called out, "Governor, beyond suspending the officer, what action will your office take?" Forsyth didn't hesitate. "By the end of this week, I will sign the Brooks Directive, a mandate requiring all law enforcement in the state to undergo special training on how to engage with veterans, the elderly, and vulnerable communities." He paused. "And let me be clear, failing to recognize a hero is not a personal mistake. It is a systemic failure, and I intend to fix it." Applause broke out. A few older men wearing veteran caps stood up and gripped one another's hands. They looked at Jeremiah like they'd just witnessed one of the defining moments of their lives. Not because a cop was punished, but because, finally, someone stood up and spoke out. The right way. At the right time. A young white woman approached, tears quietly sliding down her cheeks. "Mr. Brooks, you're the reason my father came home from Iraq. You're the man he always talked about, the commander who never left his soldiers behind. I'm so sorry for the way you were treated." Jeremiah gave a soft nod. He didn't need the apology, but in her eyes, he saw something real. Change. Governor Forsyth turned back to him. "Jeremiah, I don't have the words to do this justice, but today you reminded an entire nation of this. Dignity isn't in your title. It's in how you hold your silence through insult, until the system has no choice but to speak for you." He signaled to an aide, who opened the SUV door. "Your trip to the White House still awaits, and this time, I'll personally escort you there." Jeremiah smiled faintly. "Daniel, I came here to honor my fallen brothers, didn't expect to become the one being honored instead." Forsyth took his hand. "Because you earned it." As they stepped into the vehicle together, Jeremiah glanced back. The entire park was still. No longer a curious crowd, but a state shaken by the truth. A black boy, no older than 7, wearing a crisp white shirt, raised his hand in a perfect military salute. Jeremiah paused, then tilted his head, returning the gesture. And for the first time that day, the salute was answered. The black SUV turned off the main boulevard and sped down the priority lane toward the administrative district. Behind it lay a city that had just witnessed a moral earthquake. No one could quite put it into words, but everyone felt it. Something had shifted, and there was no going back. Inside the vehicle, Jeremiah Brooks sat upright, hands resting neatly on his knees, the deep red marks from the handcuffs still visible. Across from him, Governor Daniel Forsyth watched the veteran in pensive silence. "You could have yelled, lashed out, fought back, but you didn't do any of that," Forsyth finally said. Jeremiah stared out the window for a moment before replying. "I learned something in Fallujah. When fire's exploding in your face and people are losing their minds, the most important thing is staying quiet long enough for others to finally listen." Forsyth gave a slow nod. "And you made an entire state listen." Jeremiah turned toward him, his voice low and steady. "Listen? Maybe. But what about the others? The ones with no medals, no official invites from the governor, no cameras catching it all? Do they get heard? Or do they just get labeled, thrown in the back of a cruiser, and quietly disappear?" The silence inside the car grew heavier. "You know I'm not angry, right?" Jeremiah asked, locking eyes with Forsyth. "I'm too old for anger. What I feel is sadness. Not because I was cuffed, but because when you're in handcuffs, your words lose value. Every truth, every honor, every past sacrifice suddenly becomes pending verification." Forsyth placed a hand over his chest. "I'll make a public apology." Jeremiah gave a faint smirk, not a smile. "Daniel, no one apologizes while the cuffs are still on, poorer. And can you really uncuff an entire state?" Outside City Hall, the SUV came to a stop. The press corps was already in position, cameras armed. Hundreds of emails, calls, and statements had poured in from across the country. CNN, MSNBC, Reuters, even independent bloggers. A 57-second clip showing Jeremiah being handcuffed and the governor kneeling to remove the cuffs had gone viral on every social media platform. The hashtag #SaluteHimRight had climbed into the top 3 trending topics nationwide in under 4 hours. At the same time, the Montgomery Police Department held a brief press conference. A spokesperson confirmed Officer Wade Dursley had been suspended. A state-level investigation was underway. The last 10 years of veteran-related incident reports were being reopened and reviewed. But no one applauded at that press conference because the right thing had been too obvious and done too late. That evening, Jeremiah declined every interview request. He sat in the hotel room provided by the governor's office, watching others talk about him on the news. Each time the clip replayed, he clenched his fists, not out of rage, but because he never wanted to become the symbol of a mistake everyone should have known how to avoid. There was a knock at the door. It was Forsyth, holding 2 cups of coffee. One black, one with milk. Just like back in Fallujah. Remember the time you shot out the armored vehicle's tire to cover my retreat? I didn't shoot the tire. I hit the gas tank. You lived because you ran fast. They both laughed. An old laugh. Not from today, but from a war long past. Forsyth took a seat. I drafted the directive. It goes public tomorrow. But I wanted to ask you one last time. Do you want me to mention what happened today as an example? Jeremiah paused, thoughtful. No, don't let my name overshadow the rest. Don't make me a special case. Because if a man with medals can be treated like that, what happens to the ones who have nothing to show? Forsyth nodded slowly. Then I won't name you, but I will tell a story about a man handcuffed in broad daylight in front of a crowd simply because someone chose to see skin color before they saw the truth. Jeremiah gave a quiet nod. And add this, he said, his eyes sharp with resolve, that people don't need to know who I am to treat me with respect. All they need to know is that I'm human. 3 days after the incident, the Veterans Honor Ceremony took place at the White House. No fanfare, no live broadcast, just a quiet, dignified gathering where those who bore the scars of war sat together in a silence that needed no praise. There were no speeches that could truly capture what they carried. Jeremiah Brooks was called last. The president shook his hand firmly, but Jeremiah said nothing. No speech, no remarks. He simply bowed his head, then looked up and locked eyes with someone in the front row, a young white girl sitting beside her father. When the ceremony ended and people rose to leave, Jeremiah walked slowly across the marble floor, the light from the rotunda catching the old scar beneath his collar, the one he never tried to hide. A young black boy, maybe 9 years old, approached him shyly, clutching a worn fabric cap. I saw you on TV, the boy whispered, eyes wide with admiration. I want to grow up to be like you. Jeremiah paused. He crouched down to the boy's level, studying him for a long moment. No, son, he said gently. You don't need to be like me. You just need to remember this. Keep your head held high, and if someone puts their hand on your shoulder to pull you down, reach out and shake it. Don't clench it into a fist. The boy nodded, then raised his hand in a salute, imperfect but full of respect. Jeremiah returned it with a firm, steady handshake. That evening, in the governor's office, Daniel Forsyth appeared on live television for an unscheduled address. No music, no graphics, just him, and the unnamed story of a man handcuffed in a public park. A man who didn't yell, didn't strike back, just stayed silent, long enough for the system to be forced to speak. We honor our veterans with statues, songs, and speeches, Forsyth said. But respect isn't measured in ceremonies. It's shown in how we act when no one's watching. And today I learned something, that a handshake, when offered at the right moment, can echo louder than the crack of any gun. The next day, Jeremiah returned to the small riverside home where he'd lived alone for years. No reporters followed, no media calls came in. And that's exactly how he wanted it. In the mailbox out front, there was a handwritten card. No name, no return address, just one simple line. Thank you. You made me believe that stillness can change the world. In the end, Jeremiah Brooks didn't change America with a war, or a speech, or an uprising. He simply sat, hands cuffed, in a public park, while a society bowed its head and looked away. And it was that silence that made the entire nation stop and listen. You know, some battles aren't fought on a battlefield. There are no bombs, no weapons, just a cold stare, quiet suspicion, and a pair of steel handcuffs. Jeremiah Brooks didn't resist. He didn't scream in the officer's face. He didn't fight back, because he understood one thing. Silence can be a form of strength, when you know you're standing on the side of what's right. He didn't need people to recognize who he was. He just needed them to recognize that he was human. And that was enough. We often praise courage in the heat of combat, but rarely do we speak of the bravery it takes to sit in a park, be humiliated, disrespected, and still hold on to your dignity. Not everyone wears medals on their chest, but everyone deserves to be treated with basic respect. So today, if you see something wrong happening right in front of you, don't look away. Don't lower your head. Don't scroll past. Because sometimes a timely glance, an outstretched hand, or a simple phrase like, "I believe him," can change the entire course of someone's life. And who knows, like Jeremiah, you might leave your mark on a child, a community, or an entire nation. Because justice doesn't come from the sound of a gunshot. It comes from those who dare to stand still, at the right moment, in the right way, with the right heart. If you believe people like Jeremiah Brooks deserve to be heard, like, share, and subscribe to Radio Life Stories, so together we can keep telling the stories the world needs to hear. Radio Life Stories, where the truth doesn't need to shout to reach the heart.